There's a certain kind of person you might recognize immediately. They are the reliable one. The one who finishes the project when everyone else gives up. The one friends call during a crisis because they always seem calm, capable, steady. They carry heavy workloads, complicated emotions, and difficult situations with quiet competence. And when someone asks them a simple question, "Do you need help?" their answer arrives almost instantly. "No, I'm fine." The strange part is that they often say it even when it's not true. Even when they're exhausted. Even when they're overwhelmed. Even when a small amount of support could change everything. From the outside, it can look like pride. Or stubbornness. Sometimes even arrogance. But in most cases, something much deeper is happening. For many people who never ask for help, independence didn't begin as a personality trait. It began as an adaptation. At some point earlier in life, asking didn't go well. Maybe they tried to express a need and were ignored. Maybe the response was frustration, dismissal, or impatience. Sometimes the people they depended on simply weren't emotionally available. A child learns quickly in those environments. Not through long explanations, but through repeated emotional experiences. If reaching out leads to disappointment, the brain quietly begins to rewrite the rules. Don't expect too much. Don't rely on anyone. Handle it yourself. And slowly, self-reliance stops being a choice. It becomes a survival strategy. The human nervous system is incredibly efficient at protecting us from repeated pain. Once it detects a pattern, it builds defenses around it. For some people, that defense becomes radical independence. They learn to solve problems alone. They regulate their emotions privately. They develop an identity built around capability. And in many ways, it works. They become strong, resourceful, competent. The world often rewards these qualities. Teachers praise the responsible student. Managers trust the employee who never complains. Friends admire the person who always seems to have everything under control. But the strength that once protected them slowly begins to create an invisible barrier. Because when someone spends years proving they don't need help, the idea of asking for it starts to feel strangely threatening. Not because they believe help doesn't exist, but because asking challenges the identity they've built. If you've always been the capable one, admitting you're struggling can feel like exposing a crack in the foundation of who you are. An identity is powerful. Psychologically, we work very hard to maintain the image we have of ourselves. Even when that image quietly exhausts us. So instead of asking, these individuals double down. They stay up later. Work harder. Carry more. They tell themselves things like, "I'll deal with it," or, "It's not that bad." And sometimes they convince themselves that needing support would make them weaker than they're comfortable being. But there's another subtle layer beneath this pattern. Many people who never ask for help are actually extremely generous with it. They give their time freely. They solve other people's problems. They listen patiently to struggles that last hours. Helping others feels natural. Safe, even. Because giving help keeps them in control of the emotional exchange. When you're the helper, you're not exposed. You're not the one with unmet needs. You're the strong one, the dependable one. In psychological terms, this creates a kind of emotional asymmetry in relationships. They become the supporter, but rarely the supported. Over time, something complicated begins to form beneath the surface. A quiet imbalance. The person who gives constantly may begin to feel unseen. They might wonder why no one notices when they're struggling. But the people around them have learned a very specific lesson over the years. This person doesn't need help. They've been showing everyone that message for a long time. So others stop offering. Not out of neglect, but because the signal has always been the same. I've got it. Research in social psychology has shown something interesting about this dynamic. People consistently underestimate how willing others are to help them. When participants in studies were asked to request small favors from strangers, they predicted high levels of rejection. But in reality, most people agreed to help. Much more often than expected. The problem isn't always that support is unavailable. It's that the emotional memory of being unsupported in the past still shapes present expectations. The nervous system remembers. even when the circumstances have changed. So a colleague offering help with a deadline can trigger an unexpected reaction. Instead of relief, there's tension. A flash of discomfort. Almost as if accepting the offer would expose something private. So the automatic response appears again. No, I'm good. And afterward, something strange can happen. They continue working alone for hours, feeling tired and slightly resentful, but also oddly proud that they handled it themselves. This is the paradox of extreme self-reliance. It delivers competence, but quietly limits connection. Because human relationships depend on a balance between giving and receiving. And receiving requires vulnerability. That word can sound dramatic, but in reality it's something very small and ordinary. It might look like admitting you're overwhelmed. Asking someone to listen. Letting another person carry a piece of the weight. For someone who has built their identity around independence, those moments can feel surprisingly difficult. Not because they lack strength, but because the old survival strategy still whispers in the background. You're safer on your own. Psychologists who study attachment describe something called an internal working model. It's essentially the brain's blueprint for how relationships function. If early experiences taught you that needs were inconvenient or ignored, your internal model may quietly assume that relying on others is risky. Even decades later. Understanding this doesn't instantly change the pattern. Human conditioning runs deeper than logic. But awareness does something important. It begins to loosen the automatic response. Instead of immediately saying, "I'm fine," a person might pause. Just for a moment. Long enough to consider a different possibility. Maybe accepting help isn't a sign of failure. Maybe it's simply a different form of strength. Because true resilience was never meant to mean doing everything alone. The ability to carry heavy things by yourself is impressive. But the ability to trust someone enough to share the weight is something else entirely. It requires courage of a different kind. And for many people who have spent their lives being the strong one, that courage is still quietly waiting beneath the surface. The truth is, most people are not built to live in complete independence. Our brains evolved in communities where support was normal, where survival depended on cooperation. So when someone finally allows another person to help, even in a small way, something subtle begins to change. The nervous system learns a new experience. This time, asking didn't lead to rejection. This time, someone stayed. And those small moments slowly rewrite the old story. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Until one day the question, "Do you need help?" doesn't trigger panic or resistance. Instead, it creates something unfamiliar but deeply human. Relief. Because the strength you built from handling everything alone was real. It carried you through difficult seasons. But it was never meant to be the place you stay forever. It was meant to get you across the bridge. Not keep you there.